Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Ukraine Update from Compass Media. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. Every week we bring you news and updates from the NATO-Ukraine-Russia war. News and updates that you won't see on mainstream media, nor will you see it on state media in general. There's been a lot of developments in some ways in Ukraine, and yet very little change. Over the last week, there has been constant battle along the front lines from the south right up to the north, and yet very little advance on either side. But in the last 24 hours, there have been some changes that might be considered significant enough. Here's a general map of Ukraine, Russia up here to the northeast of Ukraine. Along the front line from south right up to the top to up to the Lugansk Oblast, the whole way along, artillery battles, attempted assaults, waves of infantry accommodated by heavy vehicles such as Bradleys and tanks, right along the front line. Absolute destruction, very little advancement. But over the last 24 hours, just down in this area here, further south, in a village or a settlement, as sometimes they're called Rabatino, over the last couple of weeks, the Ukrainians, so this is Rabatino, the settlement here, the Ukrainians have been sending wave after wave of infantry in here to try to unsettle the Russians and to move the Russians backwards using infantry as well. It hasn't worked. Over the last 48 hours, they've really started to pour waves of infantry troops and armored vehicles against the northeast section of Robertino. And the result has been that they conducted a bit of an unusual tactic in that they occupied the Russians with this wave after wave of infantry, these columns of heavy vehicles and infantry and artillery assault. And at the same time, over the last 24 hours, they created a second column that bypassed Rabatino and moved eastwards. And in doing so, they created a right angled section or a triangle that they've been able to take control of. And it's probably one of the biggest areas, geographical areas, that they have been able to take control of since they began the counteroffensive over 2 months ago. It's still not very much. You can see in the map, it's a matter of a few fields. And footage and images have come out over the last 48 hours of the losses in terms of armored vehicles in this area on the part of Ukraine, and they're very substantial. Over the last 12 hours, we've been told that up to 100 vehicles such as armored personnel carriers, tanks, have been used in this assault, not just in Robertino, but also to the east, taken in that triangle of land. And there's been losses of hundreds and hundreds of men just for those few fields, and a lot of material as well. So the question, I suppose, is it worth it in the long run? Because they haven't even reached the first line of the Russian defense. And that first line of Russian defense, and there are 5 serious lines of fortifications that they have to get through. But that first line of defense, which they haven't reached in 2 months, is a few kilometers behind Rabatino, this village or this settlement. So they're going to have their first real battle. And yet it seems as though to just achieve those few fields, those few acres, they've put in their best effort so far. Further down south in the Kherson Zaporozhye area, where we are fully aware that there's a nuclear power plant, one of the biggest in Europe, there is ongoing artillery duels or artillery battles between Ukrainian and Russian forces, in particular to try to take over the little islands or islets that exist on the delta, on the Dnieper River delta, down in that area of Kherson and Zaporozhye. These battles are ongoing. There doesn't seem to be any advancement from either side, just more loss of life, loss of personnel. In the Klivkivka region, which is further north, the Russians maintain control of the settlement of the village. The forested area appears to remain in control by the Ukrainian forces. However, the Russians are slowly advancing there. There have been reports over the last 24 hours that some Ukrainian troops have managed to enter Klivkivka village, the settlement in some area, and footage has come out of that. Whether that can be verified or not is another thing altogether. In the Arty-Mosk, or what was formerly known as the Bakhmut region, there have been small advances by the Ukrainian side, both north and south of Bakhmut. The grey zones are getting bigger there. In other words, zones that are in question, or that there's still skirmishes and battles going on, if not raging battles going on in those grey zones. So those grey zones are increasing in size. The Ukrainians are very slowly advancing, but they seem to be again giving it their all. They seem to have no concern about loss of personnel, loss of human beings, and loss of material. Up further north in the Kharkiv and Lugansk Oblast regions, the Russians have made some significant advances. It's said that they have over 100,000 troops in this area, in the northeast of this image, 100,000 troops and up to 900 tanks. And some commentators think that what they're planning to do is to move westward and to cut Ukraine in half, or at least cut the areas of Ukraine that would be used as transport systems to bring reserves and bring further equipment down from the Kiev region and maybe from the northwest of Ukraine down. And this would be a means of cutting off the personnel down south and the armies down south that are pushing so hard against Russian forces. There's also a lot of video footage that's come out over the last week. This is a video of what appears to be the bombing or the missile attack on an arms depot in Mariinka. You can see the significant explosions. This video has been speeded up, for want of a better phrase, but you can see these multiple explosions. It's either a multiple rocket launcher that's been hit, or on the other hand, it's an arms depot. And I think the reporting that I saw on it suggested that it was an arms depot that was hit. In Bakhmut or Arty-Mosk, I know the image is a bit small, but both north and south, the bombardment continues. The loss of life continues. And Russia doesn't seem to be running out of steam in its ability to produce and to manufacture and to acquire their arsenal that they need to maintain these artillery bombardments. It has been reported that in the last month, Russia has been able to produce and will continue to be able to produce as much weaponry as it produced, as in missiles, etc., as it produced in 2022. So that's a significant development. It's nothing that collective Western forces could ever match. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll try to see if that's a reality and that's a fact, or is that propaganda from the Russian side. But what we will know come autumn and moving towards winter, if they are able to maintain this constant bombardment and this outratioing of shell production compared to the West and compared to what Ukrainian forces have. This footage is of an attack in Robotyno by Ukrainian troops who were trying to take that settlement that we spoke about earlier. The attack ultimately was successful, not on Robotyno, but as a decoy, while the Ukrainians actually moved eastward and took that triangle of space that they managed to capture over the last 24 hours. But there's no saying that they'll hold it, because anybody who's watching this war knows that land that is captured one day is recaptured the next day. So there's nothing solid or there's no real foundation in observing over 24 or 48 hours the taking of some territory. It doesn't necessarily represent anything significant until you see something else happening, some more further movement, as it were. Images and videos have also come out of destroyed Ukrainian equipment in that attack on Robotyno and bypassing Robotyno. There's some footage of destroyed equipment there. There's some other footage of equipment that has been destroyed and that's being paraded in those assaults. Way down further south, much further, in areas that have not seen much conflict because they're a part of the grain deal, the ports and the coastal area around Odessa has been attacked this week as Russian government have pulled out of the grain deal, which kept them safe over the last year to year and a half. Russia strikes Danube port, escalating attacks in Ukraine grain routes. This is from Bloomberg. The assault across the river from Romania heightened the risk of a more dire confrontation with a NATO member and came on the same day that drones struck buildings in Moscow. So Bloomberg and Western headlines in general were quite surprised and taken aback. the Russians have not been attacking generally since the beginning of the war, or the middle of it anyway. Over the last while, they have not been attacking uh, areas that are close to EU or your other states' borders, but that seems to be changing now. They've been launching, I think this is the fourth night of attacks in the Odessa region on ports. The Russian government and President Putin has said that they believe the ports were being used to launch attacks against the fleets in Russia, against the Crimea Bridge, against Crimea itself, but also that it was being used to store weapons and to also take weapons in through mercantile transport systems. So big ships coming in that say they're carrying X, Y, and Z, but maybe are carrying weapons instead. So Russia seems to be taking out any opportunity for these ports to be used in any military fashion against Crimea or to advance the war effort at all. A video was released this week from an ex-mercenary, a German mercenary who was fighting in Ukraine and has come home, and he described the treatment and the war crimes and the abuse of Russian soldiers by Ukrainian soldiers in this war. We'll have a look at this video and we'll come back in a minute.
World to pose with them, to make pictures with them, to humiliate them. It was always among our Ukrainian comrades, you know, it was part of the good tone to like put a gun on their chest and say, "Oh, say Slava Ukraini," or make them say Putin Huilo, stuff like that. That was normal. That was normalized for our Ukrainian comrades. That did not happen in my units. That did not happen by any of the volunteers I was with, but it happened. It was done by the Ukrainians. Also, what was relatively normal was just to slap or to beat prisoners. Sometimes if they weren't doing anything fast enough, sometimes just because you felt like it or because somebody felt like it and just went past him, slapped him on the head, stuff like that. What I did see on one occasion was, and those were the Spetsnaz guys, one was beaten. Ukrainian comrade, he put him on his knees, he made him beg for his life, he stabbed him in the thigh with a knife, and then sent him on his way. And later that same day, I don't remember who it was. It was not the same guy, it was someone else. They took 3 prisoners of war in the nearby forest, and you could just hear, and they came back without prisoners. I think you can fill in the blanks. That is what I saw, and that is what it seemed to me like the deeds of individuals, so individual war crimes. There was actually an investigation launched by the unit into who killed the prisoners, into mistreatment of prisoners.
And 5 EU countries are applying for an extension of the ban on the importation and sale of Ukrainian grain in their home states. The importation of cheap Ukrainian grain has been a thorn in the side of farmers in countries like Romania, Poland, and Hungary, especially over the last year. And there have been protests in all those countries and a lot of political pressure put on the leadership to go against EU rules and to actually put bans on that grain. The EU is in a position now where it can't really access very much more EU grain, or Ukrainian grain, I should say, via land transportation. That's maxed out. They had plans in place. They had plans to re-engage the canal network, to use the river system like the Danube and the Rhine to get as much Ukrainian grain via, not necessarily on land, but on water via the land networks as much as possible. But that has its limitations. Now the ports have been certainly shut down, especially with these missile strikes. Nothing's going to be happening there. And Ukrainian grain appears like it's going to be going to waste. There's been a headline from CNN on this particular issue. 5 countries bordering Ukraine ask EU to extend temporary ban on importing Ukrainian grain products. 5 European Union member states bordering Ukraine are requesting that an existing ban on imports of 4 types of Ukrainian grain be extended beyond the scheduled expiry date of September 15th, the EU Council said on Tuesday. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Romania would like to see a temporary EU import ban of Ukrainian wheat, maize, rapeseed, and sunflower oil be extended to the end of the year. Spain's Minister for Agriculture, Luis Planas Pochades, said at a news conference in Brussels he was speaking in his capacity as president of the EU Agriculture and Fisheries Council. The EU adopted the measures in May to ease logistical bottlenecks and protect local farmers from being undercut in price by cheaper grain produced in Ukraine. So that is an ongoing problem. It will be interesting to see how all of this is going to impact on grain prices and general food prices. There has been a bit of a rise. I think there was a 4% jump on the first day that the grain deal wasn't happening anymore. That price jump dropped then by 2%. So we'll just see where this goes. But it's really about our food prices next year, because this is really about the way we purchase and the way we buy at a global level. Mick Wallace had a few words to say about the grain deal and spoke about why he believes Russia abandoned the grain deal. We'll have a watch of this video and we'll come back in a wee minute.
Now, my second point on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Russians have been claiming that the UN and Turkey have failed to fulfill parts of the agreement that would have allowed the easy export of Russian grain and agricultural products, which have been affected due to the sanctions imposed by the US and EU. I just wonder, what do you think of that? And there's also reports that, according to UN data, grain from Ukraine has been supplied to 45 countries since the deal was formed, but only 12% of it went to Africa and 40% of it went to the rich countries of Europe.
And by the way, we have quite a lot of statistics on where, I don't have them with me, but I'm very happy to share it with you, because I saw there was a similar question raised to our spokesperson in New York about where the grain goes. I mean, there is some that did go to high-income countries, that is correct.
Sticking with Irish associations to this conflict in Ukraine. This is a headline from the Irish Independent. Russian teen who had summer camp place cancelled due to invasion of Ukraine gets €1,500 for racial discrimination. We'll read on this one a bit. A Russian teenager who had her place in her summer camp cancelled due to the invasion of Ukraine has been awarded €1,500 for racial discrimination. The Workplace Relations Commission heard the summer camp organisers feared they were breaking the sanctions regime imposed on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine if they took the 14-year-old girl's course fee. In a decision published today, the tribunal ruled there was no basis for that claim, or for the organisers' later contention that they were concerned that other children could create difficulties for the teenager solely because she is Russian. The tribunal heard the girl's father booked a place in January on a 3-week summer course at the Children's Theatre School, which was set to take place in July that year, and paid a deposit. A representative of the girl's family inquired about paying the balance of the course fee on May 24, 2022, only to be told the school intended to cancel the booking, referring to the sanctions against Russia due to the war in Ukraine, the tribunal heard. So isn't that absolutely ludicrous that these people would even for a moment think that we would believe that they felt or they thought that a Russian family living in Ireland purchasing something and taking that money for that purchase, that would be breaching sanctions. Well, it turns out it didn't breach sanctions. It breached the human rights of that little girl, whether she's Russian or from any other country originally, or her parents for that matter. In our second last story of tonight, we have before shown videos and footage of developments in terms of residential developments in the city of Mariupol, built by the Russian state since the bombardment of Mariupol and the destruction of many parts of Mariupol last August, September and October in the conflict. Russia finally took control of Mariupol and far beyond Mariupol last October, and since then the Russians have built these massive residential areas in super fast time, and people are moving into them. This is another example that emerged this week with photographs. We'll just have a look at these. This is just amazing. When you look at this, look at the buildings behind it as well. This has all been constructed in a few months and people are moving into them. It's still under threat in many ways when you consider it, because there is the threat that, well, according to the Ukrainians, they want to again pass through this area and take control of this area. And when you consider all of the construction that has happened, you can see in the background what appears to be large hills of brickwork and debris that has been taken away from the bombing, etc. And it seems to be built up over here. But just these developments are just phenomenal. Plenty of playgrounds in the areas as well. Plenty of homes for people. It's just phenomenal to be able to see that a country that is on the one hand gone into a state of mass production in terms of its military materiel that it needs, mass production of tanks, mass production of missiles, bullets, guns, all that kind of stuff, and they're still capable of doing this at the same time and building whole cities, putting whole cities back together, and in some ways possibly making them better in terms of what's available now. To finish up tonight, folks, just a story that has emerged over the last week from Declassified, which is quite an interesting publication. If you get a chance, check it out, Declassified. And this report related to Keir Starmer. Now, there is a possibility, maybe some people think it's only a slight possibility, but there is a possibility that elections in the United States at some point may bring an end to this war in Ukraine. There are a number of contenders, such as Robert Kennedy, such as Donald Trump, who say that they are going to bring an end to this war and stop this supply of weapons. If you think that could possibly happen in the UK, if a Labour government got in control, you are much deluded, my friend. Let's have a look at this story from Declassified. We'll look at the headline first. Keir Starmer joins secretive CIA-linked group while serving in Corbyn's shadow cabinet. Starmer served in the Trilateral Commission alongside two former heads of the CIA without telling Jeremy Corbyn, who would have blocked it, Declassified can reveal. Declassified discovers Starmer joined the Trilateral Commission between 2017 and 18 while he was Corbyn's shadow secretary for Brexit. He is one of only two serving British MPs to have been a member, according to available records. Starmer spoke at group's London event in 2017 alongside former heads of MI5 and GCHQ. Former CIA director said in 2019, "We will do our level best to stop Corbyn getting elected." Corbyn's former spokesperson tells Declassified that Starmer's membership was plainly incompatible with Labour's then stated policies. Keir Starmer joined an international group and closely linked to UK and US intelligence while he was serving in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, Declassified has found. The Trilateral Commission describes itself as a global membership organisation which seeks to discuss and propose solutions to some of the world's toughest problems. Its meetings are strictly off the record. So this story is essentially saying that these meetings were happening, Keir Starmer was a part of that, and that Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer's leader and the leader of the Labour Party, and the man that Starmer undermined using terrible, slanderous remarks and claims of anti-Semitism and racism and things like this, and destroyed Corbyn's leadership, and has had him ousted essentially from the party. Well, turns out that Starmer did not inform Corbyn that he was a part of this and representing the Labour Party and representing the future government, as it was thought, of the United Kingdom at the CIA, organised CIA meeting and talking shop. And in doing so, you have to wonder to yourself, was Corbyn's undermining, was that planned at these meetings? Was Keir Starmer's membership of these meetings a part of the process of putting him in the place of the leadership of the Labour Party? This may transpire into the future. Have a check out at Declassified, watch what they're at. They're very good investigative journalists, and they're particularly focused on the intrigues of the special intelligence agencies within the United States and within the United Kingdom. That's all we have this week for you folks. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe where you can, and join us next week.